Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a blustery Tuesday evening, but we are glad that you're here with us for this Tuesday, February 21, 2023 Lakewood City Council meeting. So Madam Clerk, if you'd call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson,
Here.
Councilmember Bell,
Here.
Councilmember Boki,
Here.
Brandstetter,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Moss,
Here.
and Mayor Whalen.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now, if you'd all please stand and join me in a brief moment of silence for our men and women serving this great nation overseas as well as here at home, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, again, welcome to those of you who are here in the audience and those of you who are visiting with us virtually. We welcome all of you this evening. Tonight's meeting starts with our proclamations and presentation section of the agenda, and we are pleased tonight to have a presentation on the Pierce County Behavioral Health Tax Fund funds and program. Richard Van Cleve, the manager of the Pierce County Behavioral Health, will be here to present, and I think he's here virtually to join us. Mr. Van Cleve.
Hello, I'm Richard Van Cleve from Pierce County Human Services. Thank you again for the opportunity to present to you all today a quick update on where we're at with the behavioral health tax, where we've been the last year. I'll give a little bit of background and talk about next steps. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. I will trust that you can see my screen. So I will look in the chat here if there's questions, but I'll have plenty of time at the end for questions as well. So as I mentioned, I'm the behavioral health manager here at Pierce County. Just a bit of background on the behavioral health tax. So as you may know, the tax was passed in 2020, December of 2020, the 0.1% sales tax for funding behavioral health services in the county. The tax actually began, the county began collecting the tax in July of 2021. So at that time, we started our new department. We're a small team of 3 staff. And we currently provide oversight of the behavioral health tax here in Pierce County. At the time the tax was first implemented back in 2021, the Pierce County Council did authorize us to start 6 programs. However, the enacting ordinance for the behavioral health tax did require the department to develop a behavioral health improvement plan. And I can share the link to that plan later on in my presentation. The behavioral health improvement plan, the purpose of that plan is to identify gaps in the behavioral health system in Pierce County, and then to guide how funding is prioritized. So basically to help us set our funding targets. So go. Brief background about our division. As I mentioned, we're about 1.5 years old. Some of our goals here are to identify the needs, the behavioral health needs for all of Pierce County. We do quite a bit of problem solving with funders, so insurance companies, other grant funders. We work with providers and other stakeholders to try to problem solve around funding issues or disagreements around funding. Excuse me. We also provide leadership and advocacy for the behavioral health system in Pierce County. So some of that is where we advocate for issues around workforce, hiring practices, those sorts of things, and ensuring that our stakeholders have a voice in the selection and the funding process. Our department also administers the besides the behavioral tax, we also administer the liquor tax and a handful of general fund programs that are funded by the county council out of the main tax base. So briefly, what is the behavioral health system in Pierce County? So when we talk about the behavioral system, it's a complex system, and often those of us who work mostly in the community mental health or the government-funded system kind of tend to think of certain sectors of that, but it's quite a broad spectrum of services. So there's prevention services, wellness, prevention, education. There's group practices and private practitioners. So those are either private individuals, private therapists, or organizations that tend to serve people that have private or that have private insurance. And then of course there's the community agencies, the larger ones such as Greater Lakes, here in Lakewood. And the community agencies tend to focus their business on Medicaid individuals, and they also tend to focus on those who have a more chronic or more severe mental health or substance use disorder presentation. And then of course we have our specialty services. So those are the crisis teams, our law enforcement embedded services like the co-responders with the sheriff, involuntary commitment, of course, and then the crisis stabilization units in Parkland and the one in Fife as well are part of that crisis system. And then we have the therapeutic courts, and we do fund some of those services as well. So for the 2022-2023 funding cycle, we did release the RFP or NOFA for that back last March. The majority of the funding for the behavioral health tax, so currently funded programs, was based on a competitive bidding process last March. Before that competitive bidding process, the council did set aside some funds for new therapeutic court staff, True Blood funding, specifically the county employed True Blood staff, an alternative response team that is similar to the co-responders, but for those individuals that have not quite as high of need or intensity of services. And then the council did direct us to perform a behavioral health workforce study, and the results of that study should be coming out in the next couple of weeks as well. So going back to the competitive bidding process last year, we reviewed, or the Behavioral Health Advisory Board reviewed 32 applications, and then from those applications made recommendations for about 25 to 26 of them to be approved. Excuse me. And then those recommendations from the advisory board then went to the Pierce County Council for full approval. And I know there was a question about who makes up the Pierce County Behavioral Health Advisory Board. So I decided to just go ahead and add it to the presentation here. So we have 11 voting members on our Behavioral Health Advisory Board and 3 non-voting members. The enacting ordinance isn't really specific around who should be on the Behavioral Health Advisory Board. It just provides some recommendations or recommended categories for the Pierce County Executive to make recommendations from. So examples are from the hospital system. So Chris Ladish is from Mary Bridge. We have a few individuals with lived experience in SUD or as parents or as individuals who have received services in the mental health system. We have Elizabeth Scratcher from Stillicum. She's also a service provider for veterans. Looking down the list here, Chief Wallen works for the Sheriff's Department. So she's in the first responders category. We have NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And then you can see the others there. A couple of rural Pierce County representatives as well were suggested by Pierce County Council members. And then, of course, the non-voting members, we have Tiffany from City of Lakewood, Dr. Chen from the Health Department, and Vicki McLaurin from Tacoma. All right, so when we set out to do the behavioral health improvement plan, again, the purpose of the plan being to guide funding priorities, we decided to break it down into these 6 categories here. Part of the reason for having these categories is some of the feedback we received before doing the RFP was that some of the stakeholders felt that the county had put quite a bit of focus over the years on the crisis or inpatient system, and there needed to be more focus on some of these other categories, such as community education and prevention. So we added those. We have the category of outpatient and community-based services. Of course, still focus on crisis services, services for the justice involved, and behavioral health housing supports. So when we released the RFP, we specifically asked applicants to address these areas. In the RFP, we have it's a little more granular, so there's specifics around kind of what we were looking for. But our general approach with this RFP last year and the one that we're going to be doing soon that I'll speak to in a moment was to identify the gaps in the community and then ask those who are doing the work, the experts out there doing the work, to propose solutions to these gaps. And so I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but I did want to provide kind of an overview of the programs that we did fund. So these are programs that are funded through, there's 2 slides here. These are programs that are funded through the end of this year. So 2022, 2023. As I mentioned, we set out to get a broad array of types of programs, and we were really hoping for some innovative programs. And I honestly think we achieved that goal. So again, I won't go through all these, but you can kind of see some of the different types of programs here. I have a slide in a moment that speaks to the categories as well. You can see the funding amounts. This is the second slide, as well. So looking at that, here's what we funded. So 28 programs were initially funded. So we hit all of our core funding targets, 10 of them in early intervention, prevention. About 20 of our programs, so most of them involve some sort of outpatient or community-based services. 4 of them were crisis-based, 6 were specifically targeted or at least involved some sort of services for the justice involved. And then 2 had a housing or homeless supports component. A couple of different ways or other ways to look at these. Some of these are in more than one category. So peer services, you can see quite a bit of our programs involve family supports or children and youth. 2 of our programs are school-based, including the one in Lakewood, Communities and Schools of Lakewood. 2 veterans-focused programs, pregnant parenting, adult services. 5 had a cultural or equity focus, and then 9 of them had an SUD or substance use disorder component as well. And just another way to look at it, you can kind of see through here which percentages, again, at least half have some kind of outpatient, but we did also cover, prevention, early intervention, and so on. Most of our programs have some kind of youth and or family focus. So if you combine those 2 categories, that was definitely something that we were asked to focus on by the stakeholders and by our board. And again, I think we hit that target as well. All right, so next steps. So we are our plan is to release the next RFP in just a few weeks on March 13th. That will be for services provided in 2024-25. We like to start early. We want to start earlier this year in the process because we do ask our board to do scoring and we do interviews, and it's quite a long process. And then because all of our contracts are very different from each other, we have 28 programs, but those programs, we don't have one program that's really similar to the program next to it. So we don't have kind of a boilerplate or anything approach. It just kind of takes a little bit more time to work through the negotiation process. And then, of course, again, we'll have our advisory board review applications, make those recommendations, and then the Pierce County Council does approve any final recommendations. I will say there's been so I mentioned those priorities earlier, the justice involved, outpatient, early intervention. We are adding a few new categories this year. One of them is asking for programs that specifically focus on rural areas. We're asking for programs that focus specifically on traditionally underserved populations. And then we are going to reference the upcoming workforce study, behavioral health workforce study that we contracted with a specialist agency to perform. That study will be completed in just a week or so. And we're also going to ask, we'll ask the applicants if they're also interested in seeking funding for programs that address the workforce issue that we're facing in behavioral health. Behavioral health workforce is our #1 kind of barrier to getting services to people currently. We have programs that we've actually funded who have been posting jobs for weeks and months and haven't been able to hire clinical staff to perform those services. So I will stop there and see if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Van Cleve, for the presentation. Any questions? Mr. Anderson.
When I reviewed this initially, I was pretty much shocked to see it was spread in 28 different directions. Something for everything, but not everything for any particular thing. Was there any effort made to prioritize the use of the funds as opposed to make sure it hit every category possible?
Yeah, I think the prioritization was to try to get those categories. There wasn't necessarily any single one of those categories, except for I think the general idea that we needed to do better with early intervention and prevention. And then I think another area that kind of came to the top was seeking providers who were going to provide substance use disorder services as well. Part of the nature. Oh, go ahead. You're going to.
Was there any data of past performance analyzed as opposed to just looking at the representations of what the provider thought that they could do?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So part of the selection process is we do ask providers to speak to their previous performance on similar projects. And then going forward, so we have a pretty intense metrics or measurement process. So we had all of our contracts be value-based or have a value-based component, I should say. And then each contractor has at least 3 kind of main areas or 3 main targets as far as outcomes or outputs, outcomes and outputs that we require of them. And so for this next round, because these are all new providers and it's a new program, this next round, we're going to be scoring them if they choose to apply. Again, we'll be scoring them on their current and past performance.
Yeah, I think you almost anticipated my next question which is outcomes versus outputs. Output measuring activity outcomes, whether people get better, whether you're off drugs, whether you're stabilized under medication, if you have serious behavioral health issues. Are you scoring these people based on outcomes or outputs?
Yeah, great question. So we do have, we do require at least one outcome measure as part of those ones that I mentioned. So we have outputs and outcomes. We generally have both. Each program has at least one outcome. For the treatment-based programs, it's a little bit easier because we can require them to do things like clinical measures that show improvement over time. So we do integrate those sorts of things into it. So we, expect to show improvement in depression or activities of daily living, those sorts of things. For the ones that are more kind of, we have a couple like health department ones that are more educational or outreach focused, and those are a little bit tougher to make outcomes, but we do require it.
Thank you.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Van Cleve. The funding on your first slide, it says the majority of the behavioral health tax funding is based on a competitive RFP. What does majority mean? Is that 55%, 75%, 90%? That's a pretty big gap to where there's another amount of money going on.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I would say, and I can get you the number exactly, but I'm sitting here, it's probably 95 or higher. Almost all of it. The only parts that really weren't were and by not competitive, I mean it was added to the program's budget, to the program's biennial budget, and so that would be the alternative response team and some county staff related to True Blood, and that's a pretty small percentage overall. So I can get the exact number, but it's definitely almost all of it is competitive.
So it's a significant majority.
Yes.
Okay. At several points in your on that slide of where there was set aside funding for therapeutic courts, and therapeutic courts were mentioned a couple of times in your slides there. How many therapeutic courts are there actually in Pierce County that are eligible under the behavioral health umbrella of this funding?
So really, any therapeutic court that involved anything to do with behavioral health would be eligible. So we currently only fund the district court. So it's a district court, behavioral health court. But there are other courts. There are the drug court, the veterans court, and I think there's 5 therapeutic courts total, but we don't fund any of those. Currently, we also fund what's called the AOT, or Assisted Outpatient Treatment Court. So I guess there's 2 that we fund. That's kind of a hybrid court. It's not necessarily a therapeutic court, but so yeah, we could fund more, but currently those courts have other funding sources.
So in the RFP that you issued, or the one you will be issuing next month, when the RFP is put out, are you asking for folks to respond to a request, as Councilmember Anderson says, to have performance measures that make a difference? Or are you just asking people to say, what can you do under these plan funding target categories? So how does a provider decide whether to submit something? Do they have to actually fill a gap, or do they just have to fit into a funding target?
Yeah, so the funding target, so there's those broad funding targets, and then in the RFP, under each funding target, we give examples. For example, the under outpatient, kind of outpatient category, which is a very broad category, we mention things like school-based services, and those sorts of things. We specifically mention types of programs. So we are more specific than I mentioned there, just to save space in the presentation. But yes, we do have specifics And we also leave room for them to provide other options too, as long as they meet those same, funding areas. For example, we already had school-based services that were provided by one provider in the county in 4 or 5 school districts. And they could also apply to do something similar, or something that also meets that target. So for example, the Communities and Schools of Lakewood program isn't really doing exactly like our existing programs were, but they're doing something in the schools that is, targeting mental health and those sorts of things.
And I understand, it's the first RFP that you issued, and you were at the same time doing just dealing with an initial plan to do that. But as you move forward with subsequent RFPs, are you going to be asking people to make a difference and fill specific gaps that you've been able to look at and identify? For example, in Lakewood, we have gotten a lot of information, particularly from young people in our youth council and folks that deal with youth, but young people specifically about, that they really need to have things available, and that the school districts not the school district, but their schools is the place that they'd like to be able to have access points to do that. And yet in this first RFP, while there were quite a few folks that said they were going to serve youth, only 2 were school-based.
Right.
So you're picking and choosing small groups of young people, categorizing them by however a provider wants to categorize them to serve, as opposed to reaching out to the many school districts comprehensively across the county to say, we want to have an in-school based and maybe even a consistent provision of services, not school district by school district, or in the case of the Clover Park School District, where there was one program funded, but that it only covers 5 schools in a 20 school district. I guess we're really hoping when this funding was approved and Lakewood decided to not implement the tax ourselves, but allow tax be receipted for in our community, in that we were looking for something that would look addressing things regionally. It does seem that things are spread very thin, and it's difficult to understand with all this extra money coming in, are we regionally actually getting a lot more than we had before? Because when I looked at your list of projects that were approved, there's a whole lot of expands and increases and does that, and it generally, it talks about services and sessions and things, and very little about patient outcomes. And you did respond that there's one outcome measure at least for each person who receives some funding, but I'm kind of looking for we're really looking for outcome measures of people who have gotten better as a result of what we're paying for, not just that they were able to get an appointment, or that they were seen by somebody, and so now they're considered an outcome
Right.
because somebody got them to come into an office and see somebody. And so I would really, would like to see as you and your group move forward in consecutive bienniums, that you really start asking providers to do what you determine that they need, rather than asking providers, what do you want to do? And we'll decide whether that's a good thing and give you money if we do, to be able to go and do that. You did allocate quite a bit of money on the last RFP. But you mentioned that some folks who received allocations were having trouble hiring the professional staff needed to actually do what they were funded to do. Do you have any plans to pull back funding from those folks that are getting you're halfway through the contracting period, a half start to do that? And did you actually hold any money back in the original RFP to put it in the bank for a future investment in behavioral health?
Yeah, thanks. So to the last question, our contracts are generally structured so that we don't give any providers funding until they provide a service or hire staff who are doing the service. So those providers who haven't been able to provide services or hire staff, we just haven't given them money at all because they need to bill us for what they've done. So we've tried to structure things. We don't have any capacity contracts or anything where we just kind of give them money. We've specifically shied away from doing that. So, and then to the other question, I think around kind of the additional funding, we were directed by our budget office and I think council to go out and ask and see if providers needed additional funding, because we did have some additional funding that was unspent from last year, about 4.5 million. And we reached out to our existing providers, those who were spending the money out, those who were providing services, and asked them if they could use that additional funding. There was still left over after that, so we're going to include that in the next round, this upcoming RFP. And then to the point about the schools, I agree. And the metrics, I think we 100% agree that we want providers to be accountable for showing improvement in their client and the clinical outcomes. And with the schools, great point. And one of the kind of limitations of anything that's kind of like this, where we have an RFP and we're asking providers to step forward, even when we're specific about, for example, the school-based programs, is convincing people to apply and convincing that it's going to be worth their time to expand services in light of the fact that they can't hire staff for their existing programs. We have been meeting with the superintendents. We met with them a couple of times over the last few months, the superintendents of the schools in Pierce County, and have been talking to them about their needs. And they really wanted us to focus more on kind of crisis services. So we've been doing that. We did offer them to provide in-school services. And I think it's just a matter of, each school district has different needs and different wants. So, but that's an ongoing conversation. We definitely value their input as well. So, yeah.
Okay, I guess that I would just comment on my perception of the rollout that's here. It does seem that you have looked at behavioral health as a broad problem that has lots of problems to do that, but that even a lot of money, as the tax is raised, when it's spread too thin, doesn't make impacts specifically, and that there is maybe an idea of going forward if your staff and the behavioral health advisory board and that take a look at saying, okay, which gaps can we really make a difference in? and which ones are just, they're going to be there no matter how much money we pour at it. I have to think that communities around the nation have been seeing that in terms of trying to address substance abuse and some things that are there, spending a lot of pennies and dimes on substance abuse programs when, if you're really going to make a difference in a program like that, and to really evaluate, to say, if we target these narrower areas for Pierce County, we can actually make a difference in more lives. Because really what this is not a program to sustain programs or services or providers. This is a program to make a difference in the lives of individual residents to do that. And that you also incorporate that into the outcomes that you insist upon seeing when you provide money to someone who says they're going to go out and do that, rather than that they're just going to touch people. They need to change people. But I thank you for being here tonight, and I think you have you're driving an important train that is needed. I guess I just say keep track that if you're the engineer or the conductor, your job is not to spend the money. Your job is to make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandstetter. Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Richard, for the presentation. Just a few questions. First of all, on the committee itself, did they make a judgment as to the split between substance use disorder and behavioral health or mental health? I guess would be the better, because it all falls under behavioral health. So substance, did they decide on any kind of split, or did it just kind of catch as catch can?
Yeah, there wasn't specifically that conversation. I think, to be totally honest, because we had a certain amount of funding, and even the number of agencies that applied that first round was, to be totally honest, most people who applied got funded because there wasn't that many as far as how much each agency was asking. Because, we had some agencies that didn't ask for that much. And so in the big picture, so there wasn't really necessarily any situation where it was like, okay, do we need to balance these two? Because the funding was, I guess, mostly adequate for funding most of what we got.
Okay.
Hope that helps you.
Thank you. You mentioned True Blood.
Yeah.
And if I'm asking something that's really out of your area of expertise, just say you don't know, right? But True Blood goes back to a court case, right? At the state level, I believe the plaintiff's name is True Blood. It was really brought in behalf of this individual into, I think, federal court. I thought it was done. That there was a certain amount of money, a pool of money available. Is that still True Blood limping along, or has it been rebirthed, or what's going on?
Yeah, so it's kind of limping along. So the county received True Blood funds. So our department received True Blood funds up until June 30th of last year. And because we knew that that funding supported a number of jail-based services. Greater Lakes was actually the main provider out of Lakewood. So we had all these services and court staff and all this that were funded by True Blood, kind of funneled through Human Services. Knowing that was going to end, the council and the advisory board kind of agreed that we should keep those services going, because in some communities around the state, those services just stopped. So we basically moved the True Blood funded programs to the behavioral health tax. But there is talk of them continuing to fund something. So for example, Greater Lakes did end up receiving funding at the last minute after we already authorized them. They ended up receiving funding from the state and through June of this year, 2023. So it just seems to kind of go ledge session to ledge session. So yeah, it's kind of still out there.
Thank you. So then when the True Blood money goes away, just physically goes away, it's not there anymore, you're not subject to supplanting provisions under state law under the behavioral health tax. Is that what you're?
Right.
Okay. So on the supplanting provisions, the way I understand it, so you're basically having to fund new programs, but is there an exception for the courts?
Yeah, well, so when it comes to the courts, for the most part, we're not necessarily funding like the judge, for example, or the commissioner. We're funding the staff that are specifically assigned to the behavioral health part of the program.
Mhm.
So then we're not supplanting.
Okay. So you added people in the courts to work, not judges, right? But
Right.
it's a general fund provision.
Right.
I think, and then you talked about this. Clearly, there's a tension between on the mental health side. I call it, let me use my words, a tension between the emergency portions of mental health and the preventive side, as you call it, that the health department's involved in. We talked about school-based programs because we have an interest in that, and Communities and Schools of Lakewood is an important part of our community. So MCERT, which is out of Central Pierce Fire, I think. Did you, and then there's the MOC-T,
Right.
multi-care. Did any behavioral health funds, and I think it was somewhere on your list, go to those? And was that an expand? So I'm talking about two programs now,
Yeah.
but did you work to expand those programs, and are those available countywide?
Right. So MCERT is funded from the general fund of the county. It's not specific to the behavioral health tax, and they are countywide. They do funnel through human services, but they're not behavioral health tax. And then the MOC-T, or the mobile outreach crisis team, that's actually funded. So the core crisis team, the core involuntary commitment and crisis team out of MultiCare is countywide. But the core of that is actually funded by Beacon Health, which is the administrative services organization for Pierce County. They receive the funding from the state for crisis services for our county. So we do work with them closely on what we fund, because they could fund some of the same things that we do, or there's a lot of similarities. So, but what we fund from the behavioral health tax specifically, we do fund people or extra positions on that multi-care crisis team, but they're specific to what we're funding. So we have 9 of the co-responders who are they would be just regular crisis workers or designated crisis responders, but they're specifically attached to the sheriff's department, and they go out with the sheriff. So we fund those. Those were previously funded by True Blood and by some other grants, but we absorbed them into the behavioral tax. So we do that. And then the alternative response team is also technically part of that larger crisis team that MultiCare operates. But again, they're attached to the sheriff, and more kind of focused on social service follow-ups from sheriff's calls. So, and those programs, those co-responders are technically not countywide because they're attached to the sheriff. So you'd have to be in the sheriff's jurisdiction.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Branstetter.
I apologize. I have just one follow-up comment because I was trying to read my own handwriting on my notes that I wrote. On your plan funding targets, and you have 6 of them, and they cover the breadth of the needs of individuals that might be. But I guess that I would suggest that you look at adding a funding target that talks about what you can do to increase the number of providers that are in the county. You know, there are, some strategies that could be used, like a student loan forgiveness program based on the fact that a person will practice in Pierce County for X number of years or something, or at a level to get increase the number of seats in programs in the county that are producing providers. I don't know what that is, but it seems that from your presentation, the shortage of providers exasperates being able to make progress in all of the other things, and that sending some dollars towards that end is a way to make a long-term difference. If something for you and your folks to consider as another funding target.
Great. That's a great idea, and I think we're actually going to do that. So I think I mentioned the behavioral health workforce study, which they're going to do a presentation of the outcomes of their study and recommendations to the Pierce County Council's Human Service Committee on March 7th. But I will definitely also pass along the written recommendations to your staff as well. And I totally agree. That's kind of the number one thing going forward. It doesn't matter how many contracts we give out if people can't hire people. So yeah.
Good. Anything else? Well, thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. My only thought or comment here is we, on the elected side, hear a lot from constituents about the challenges with homelessness in the various communities within our region. And we also hear a lot about what is the perceived connection between behavioral health and homelessness. So through your work to date, given the allocation, I saw that there was 15% allocated toward homelessness or those kinds of activities. What has been your impression on the direct connection between behavioral health and the homelessness issue? And if it's significant, as many people believe it to be, why is the allocation of funding so limited?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, there's the double connection between severe behavioral health or SED and mental health issues can often lead to homelessness, and the behavioral health or mental health impact of homelessness on anybody just to begin with. Just facing the stress of trying to find a place to live and all that too, and the stigma and all that. So again, I think it's I think it's really just a matter of us trying to encourage providers to expand or to do new things, and that's kind of part of our task here, is to get the word out, to say, hey, please do this, do these things that we're asking you to do here. There's just a limited number of providers who do behavioral health in shelters or those sort of outreach programs, and it's convincing them to keep trying it or to expand. But I agree, we definitely need more in that area. And we can also work with our homeless team or homeless part of human services as well around that. So
well, hopefully through all your good work, we'll find over the course of time, the best impact and the best leverage and the best partnership to create, the highest and best impacts for all the residents in the community that we can. It's a challenging, multi-headed issue for sure. Anyone else? That's it. Thank you again for your work and your thorough presentation tonight. We appreciate it and look forward to chatting in the future about outcomes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, Mr. Anderson. Oh, city manager had a question or point?
Question for the city
attorney. Question for the city attorney. Richard, I think you're probably done unless you're. Is it for
Right.
Mr. Halverson's?
No, not for him.
Okay.
Mr. Bankley.
Or Bankley, rather. Yeah. All right. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.
Good evening. You bet.
So the statute that authorizes the behavioral health tax, there was much delay in the implementation in Pierce County. I may not be reading the right section, but when I read it, it says if a city over 25,000 or whatever it is implements the tax after 2011 particular date, then there's a full credit from the county tax. It doesn't seem to put a deadline on when the city must implement the tax. Is that correct?
Councilmember Anderson, members of the council, I am going to have to go back and look at that because as I remember at the time, there was some concern about when cities entered that versus when the county would enter it. So I want to make sure that I don't give you misguidance on that.
That was my recollection too, but when I looked
Yeah.
at the actual statute, it just said after a particular date in 2011.
Correct.
And the reason I say that is I calculate that it's probably worth $1.2 to $1.5 million to the city of Lakewood. And as we have seen tonight, the initial foray by Pierce County Council and allocating it was to give something to everybody,
Correct.
which I think is a poor use of public funds. And if there isn't some focus, we may want to reconsider our options and whatever it might be to implement the tax on the city level and focus like on behavioral health related to homelessness.
Correct. I'm going to want to pull that and I think our memories are the same, but the language says what it says, right? So I'll take a look at that and see what that means for us.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Well, good presentation. Thank you, staff, for putting that together. We now turn to the public comment section of tonight's agenda. Public comments are accepted by mail, email, or live virtual or in-person comment. Comments may be submitted in advance by mail or email to Ms. Schumacher, our city clerk at 6000 Main Street Southwest here in Lakewood. Comments received up to an hour before the meeting have been provided to the council electronically. The clerk will now read the names of those who have submitted written comments in advance.
Mayor, we received written comments in advance from Casey Crook.
Thank you very much. And I read that. It was involving the Pierce County Library System, I believe, and the library in Lakewood. Members of the audience may comment on items related to any matter pertaining to city business under this public comment period. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. There is a public hearing this evening. If you'd like to provide testimony specific to the proposed disposal through surplus of vehicle number 42221, please reserve your comments to that portion of tonight's agenda, the public hearings portion. It could be a lengthy meeting on that. Virtual comments are certainly also authorized. If you'd like to provide live virtual public comments, you can join the Zoom meeting via your telephone and dialing the number on the screen, entering the meeting ID number as indicated, and please use the raise the hand feature, *9. What I typically try to do is bounce back and forth from regular meeting to first call on those who are either on Zoom or in person. And tonight, those who are on Zoom get to be picked first. So those who have raised their virtual hand to address the council will be called upon first, followed by those who have signed in to speak to us physically here in chambers. I see Christina Minetti with her hand raised. Ms. Minetti.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Hello, everybody. Christina Minetti, Lakewood. The other day I got a postcard from the city announcing that the new tree regulations were coming into force. I was surprised to see that the prominent illustration was a picture of oak leaves, but not the native Gary oak leaves, rather what appear to be English oak leaves. With all the talk of Gary oaks, the city council's proclamation making the Gary oak Lakewood's official tree, better late than never, the painting of the Gary oak that graced your chambers for quite a few weeks, one would think that greater care would have been given to the selection of illustration. It seems a sign of the general state of affairs, however. The topic of non-native oaks came up recently when I was reviewing the application for the Ward's Lake improvements the other day. I was shocked to see that the project's authors proposed to plant something with the odd name forest green oak. curious what this strange sounding tree could be, I found that it's actually the non-native Hungarian oak. As a friend commented, why a Hungarian oak? Why not just a Gary oak? I have the same question. Of course, they grow more slowly, but planting non-native oaks of the white oak family in our area poses a direct threat to the native Gary oak because of their ability to hybridize with it. Hybridizing means that the genetic integrity of our only native oak will be compromised. Native oaks must be prioritized. The project to replant hundreds of World War I memorial oaks in DuPont poses the same problem. 3 types of oaks were planted, including Gary oaks and the English oaks that can cross with them. Surprisingly, Lakewood Gardens took some of the extra English oaks that the project's organizers had left over and planted them on their own property. They apparently did not take into account the potential for hybridization. This leads me to my next point. It seems that too much stock has been placed in the so-called experts who prove less than adequate. Professional landscape artists, or perhaps even arborists, were the ones who proposed the so-called forest green oaks. I believe they were hired by the city, were they not? I think they were also not from the area, so perhaps not familiar with our oaks here, though they should have been. The city should have pointed out the problem to them. The same thing with Lakewood Gardens. The city looks to them as experts in the field. Yet we see that they have also neglected to consider a very important matter in terms of preserving our only native oak, which is, after all, a keystone species on which the web of life in this area depends. I've seen the city fail to respect the best available science over and over again during the past 2 years. At Wards Lake, so-called improvements are being proposed that are utterly inappropriate for a priority habitat, as that area has been officially recognized. Uplighting oaks is another example of best science being ignored. I ask that you find and retain true experts as you implement your new urban forestry program, and that you do everything possible to provide further protections for the Gary oaks and other trees beyond those adopted in the new tree code. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That is the only individual I see with a hand raised to address council during the public comment period virtually. Madam Clerk, do you see any other hands raised, or am I missing anyone?
There are no other hands raised at this time.
Okay, very good. We'll turn to those who have signed in to address council physically tonight. James Dunlop is first on the sheet.
Hello, my name is James Dunlop and I'm a Lakewood resident. I believe you are about to start the process of selecting a replacement for Linda Farmer. I do believe she did the city a grave disservice by not completing her term, because as I've said before, this represents a democratic deficit. You're going to get a councillor who has not been elected by the people of Lakewood. Now, I looked back at the YouTube video of how John Simpson's replacement was selected, and it seemed to me that the council, in terms of their questions, put a great emphasis on the ability of a new councillor to be consensual, but somehow consensus is a good thing. Now, as you come to selecting a new councillor, a replacement for Linda Farmer, I'd like you to consider the possibility that someone who is consensual, someone who's not going to rock the boat, is not necessarily going to be the right candidate. I think an example of someone who really is into consensus would appear to be the mayor of Tacoma. She said, a 4-5 vote is politics, a 9-0 vote is leadership. Now, there is great pressure to have consensus. And if you look at history, there are some disastrous examples of consensual decisions. To take an extreme example, the Wannsee Conference, where the final solution to destroy European Jewry, there were PhDs, administrators, bureaucrats at that meeting, and yet it was a complete consensus. Heydrich, who ran it, he was expecting some opposition, but he got nothing. People were quite happy with it. Then, a more American example is the Bay of Pigs, where I've been looking at Irvin Janis's groupthink. And if you look up consensus in the index, you can see it says consensus, then it says C conformity, pressures toward, unanimity, illusion of. So consensus is when a member is dependent on the group for bolstering his feelings of confidence and self-esteem, he tends to exercise self-censorship over his misgivings. The greater the dependence, the stronger will be the motivation to adhere to the group's norms. One of the norms that is likely to become dominant under conditions of high external or internal stress involves living up to a mutual non-aggression pact. So when you choose a replacement for Linda Farmer, I really would ask you to consider the possibility that consensus is not a virtue.
That is the last individual who has signed in to address council during the public comment period, but certainly if you're here and you have a desire to address the council during this period on matters related to city business, feel free to join us at the dais there. If there's anyone else who'd like to address council during the public comment period, please go ahead and step up. If not, I'll declare the public comment period closed. Madam Clerk, we'll now turn to the consent agenda. If you'd proceed.
A, approval of the minutes of the city council study session of January 23rd, 2023. B, approval of the minutes of the city council meeting of February 6, 2023. C, motion number 2023-16, authorizing the execution of an interlocal agreement with the Lakewood Water District for construction of a water main along Hipkins Road near the vicinity of Dresden Lane and 87th Street. D, motion number 2023-17, authorizing the execution of an agreement with Greater Lakes Mental Health Care for 2 mental health care professionals. E, motion number 2023-18, authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with Washington State Emergency Management Department in the amount of $62,565 for emergency management performance. F, motion number 2023-19, appointing Julie White to serve as the Pierce College representative on the Lakewoods Promise Advisory Board. G, motion number 2023-20, appointing Shelby Taylor to serve on the Community Services Advisory Board through December 15, 2026. H, items filed in the office of the city clerk. 1, Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board meeting minutes of September 22nd, 2022. 2, Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board meeting minutes of October 27th, 2022. 3, Lakewoods Promise Advisory Board meeting minutes of January 5th, 2023. 4, Planning Commission meeting minutes of January 18th, 2023.
Thank you very much. Is there any item which any council member wishes to remove from the consent agenda at this time? If not, do I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by council members Boki and Bell that we adopt the consent agenda as presented. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda has been adopted. We now turn to the regular agenda. First up is the matter of public hearings and appeals. Madam Clerk.
This is the date set for a public hearing on the proposed disposal through surplus of vehicle 42221, a boom truck formerly used to maintain the City of Lakewood traffic signal system.
Thank you very much for this very interesting matter. Mr. Busich, I understand you're going to give us a bit of an overview before we turn to the public hearing tonight.
Good evening, Mayor Whalen, Deputy Mayor Moss, members of City Council. This will be short and brief. We have a vehicle called a boom truck that the city purchased in 2015 for use to maintain our traffic signal systems when we had 2 signal techs. We have now transitioned to utilizing Pierce County for all of our signal tech work, and the vehicle has been sitting for the last 2 years unused. Pierce County has expressed an interest in buying that vehicle from us because they would like to have another newer vehicle for their fleet. And we have been in conversation with them and had it evaluated and came up to a reasonable, what we believe, both parties believe is a reasonable value for it. State RCW requires that before we can sell, transfer, exchange, lease, or otherwise dispose of real or personal property to other government entities, then we have to hold a public hearing to determine if there are any objections to such transfer of assets. Tonight is the night for that public hearing. If there are no objections and council authorizes us to move forward with this after tonight's meeting, then we'll continue down the path of Pierce County purchasing the vehicle from us at their earliest convenience. Open to any questions, answer any questions should you have some.
Any questions of Mr. Busick? I may Mr. Busick. What is the price offered?
125, but I think it's probably going to be closer to 120. But the original purchase value was 178,000 in 2015. And so the depreciation on the vehicle and the condition of the vehicle have all been accounted for the value that we would receive.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. If there are no questions of Mr. Busick, this will be the time for the public hearing on this particular item. Public testimony on the public hearing is accepted by mail, email, or live, virtual, or in-person comment. Again, testimony can be submitted in advance by mail or email to our city clerk at 6000 Main Street Southwest here in Lakewood, or via email at bschumacher@cityoflakewood.us. Testimony received up to an hour before the meeting will have been provided to the city council electronically. Madam Clerk, have we received any public comment on this item?
Mayor, no testimony has been received on this public hearing.
Very good. We'll now turn to either virtual or in-person public comment during this public hearing. Again, testimony is limited to 3 minutes per person. If you'd like to provide your testimony virtually, please dial in on the telephone number appearing on the screen. Enter the meeting ID number as reflected and use the raise the hand feature by pressing *9. So at this time, I will call on any members of the public that wish to provide testimony during the public hearing virtually. Madam Clerk, do you see any audience members who wish to address this item during the public hearing virtually?
Mayor, there are no virtual hands raised at this time.
Very good. I'll now turn to those who may be here in person. I have no names on the public hearing sign-in sheet. Are there any members of the audience who wish to address or testify at the public hearing on the proposed disposal through surplus of vehicle 42221, a boom truck, formerly used to maintain the city of Lakewood's traffic signal systems? Some might say on some routes efficiently, on other routes not as efficiently. Seeing no members of the audience wishing to testify during the public hearing, both virtually or in person, I declare the public hearing closed. We now turn to resolutions. Resolution 2023-04, Madam Clerk.
Resolution number 2023-04, consenting to a transfer of control of franchise to Rainier Connect North LLC.
Very good. For this, we are receiving an update overview from our city attorney, Heidi Wachter.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. Heidi Wachter, City Attorney for the City of Lakewood. We have been informed that there's been an acquisition of sorts of Rainier Connect, and I've included that in my cover sheet. Bluntly, I'm not sure how much we could do about it. They can run out the clock on us, and if they do that, the deal takes effect anyway. The important pieces to know are, number one, that the day-to-day business will continue to be fairly local and run the way that we're used to. And number two, our franchise is coming up, and sometime in the next several months, we'll be initiating discussions. And again, that would be with the local folks that have been taking care of us in the form of Rainier Connect. I would be happy to try and answer any questions. I should advise you that trying to read this document was not exactly a sizzling page turner, and I got what I could from it, but I'm probably not going to be able to do a lot of in-depth question and answer with regard to what this deal is. Essentially, it's one company swallowing another.
Are you trying to tell me that legal counsel doesn't enjoy longstanding tedium in documents?
Well, especially when you aim to actually understand it by the time you're through, it's quite the slog. And I do think I'm fully apprised of what they did here, but yeah, it's pretty tedious language.
Are there any questions of Ms. Wachter? Mr. Anderson?
Just a comment, I feel for you. I received 6 copies, three to me and 3 to the executive. And that's put on my desk and you can't do anything about it.
Yes, you and I share an experience now, don't we?
Were all the-
Anything
Were all
else?
the copies similar in terms of, I hope you read every single one. Okay, I'm just checking. Mr. Brandstetter.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Walker, do I correctly interpret that the timeline to have a new franchise agreement in place is May of 2024?
I believe that's correct. Yes, we're aiming to float a letter to them probably within the next couple of months, just to initiate discussions. We like to leave as much time as possible.
Okay, we're in a comfortable window to be able to have all the discussions we want and make any changes that might be desirable from our point of view.
Correct. Well, at least initiate discussion about such changes. Yes, correct.
Okay, and is the option for the franchise agreement a new agreement or adding another 5-year extension?
It is a new agreement. The original agreement was 5 years with the extension of 5, and we are in that extension right now. And council may remember when we discussed it originally, a lot of times franchises are much longer periods of time. But as was pointed out by the council, this particular industry, and it's evident in what we're bringing forward to you tonight, is evolving so quickly that the council felt that shorter terms made more sense so that we would have an opportunity to negotiate as things are evolving a bit. And that turned out to be very accurate on the part of the council.
Okay, I do recall the last time a number of years ago that we discussed this, there was some concern about the speed at which availability of Click was progressing throughout the community. It started off with a very limited footprint that it was available and moving forward. So, maybe this is a window to where we can get some clarity of what's going to happen with that to provide residents choice in a field where there's, in some cases, they feel there isn't much.
Yes,
Okay,
duly
thank you.
noted.
And just of interesting note, the document attached to our packet tonight about the transferee, the information about the transferee, the financial, stability of the franchise on a Federal Communications Commission form.
Right.
So it's pretty rote. It
Yes.
appears. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay, very good. Any further questions of Ms. Wachter? If not, is there a motion to adopt resolution 2023-04 consenting to the transfer of control of the franchise to Rainier Connect North LLC?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of resolution 2023-04.
Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Boki, seconded by Deputy Mayor Moss. We adopt resolution 2023-04. Any further discussion? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution 2023-04 has been adopted. We now turn to unfinished business. Mr. Caulfield,
There is none, Mayor.
any new business
Not this evening, Mayor.
tonight? Great. So next up, reports by the city manager, Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council. I'd like to call upon our strategic planning manager, Tiffany Spear, to give you an update on where we are with the ARPA funds, as well as some suggestions on next steps, specifically as it relates to Aspen Court. So I think she is virtual. So Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Caulfield, and good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I am trying to get myself on screen. My apologies. In any event, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. So I am here, as is Ted Thielen. He is also remote this evening, but the two of us are the program coordinator and manager for the American Rescue Plan Act program for the city of Lakewood. There was a discussion had back in December, if you recall, where decisions were made by council to fund several additional items through ARPA funding. And then there was also a request made to come back with some recommended use of funds for city use. And so that's one reason why we're here this evening. But in front of you here on this slide, and starting on page 112 in your packet, there's a list of things that have been funded to date through ARPA. So you'll see here on this page, everything that's gone to external groups. So Career Team and Clover Park School District were provided funding through recommendations by the Community Service Advisory Board for workforce training, youth mental health services. Lehigh, there was the contribution for the purchase of Comfort Inn, which is now Aspen Court. Infrastructure funding for a Habitat for Humanity project, the Rebuilding a Healthy Neighborhood program for Rebuilding Together South Sound. Communities and Schools Lakewood received funding for its Warriors of Change program. Pierce County received funding for its BIPOC Business Accelerator program. Boys and Girls Club was given 5 years worth of funding for various teen and young adult services and mental health first aid, as you see. Northwest Youth Corps is providing now last year and then this year a youth employment program. Tacoma Pro Bono is providing eviction prevention legal services through the Lakewood Housing Justice Project. West Pierce Fire and Rescue received funding for improvements to their operations centers and purchase of several other emergency equipment. YMCA is focused on younger youth than Boys and Girls Club, so little learners, youth sports, gymnastics, and other after-school activities. And then, as I mentioned recently, there was the decision to fund the Emergency Food Network and Nourish Pierce County, and then Tacoma Rescue Mission and LASA for various capital improvements or projects. So for the city so far, the City Council has approved funding for temporary staffing last year for COVID-19 tracing, the Lakewood Police Department retention bonus, the Lakewood body cameras, both hardware and personnel, replacement or improvements to the HVAC system at City Hall for air quality, reader boards for the city, improvements to the municipal court technology, looking at the first phase for the City Hall reconfiguration potential, looking at installing hand washing stations at city parks that have no bathrooms, and then improving the city's website and in particular, allowing multiple language translation. So with all of those things done, there's about 1.78 million remaining to be obligated under ARPA by the end of 2024. And so on December 5th, the City Council did ask that staff come back and provide some recommended projects that would be internal to the city for those remaining funds. And we have done that tonight. We are also bringing forward to you several recommendations of actually some externally handled programs that have been particularly helpful for Lakewood residents. So the internal recommendations would be to continue to fund the personnel for the body-worn camera program through the end of 2026. And that would result in having funding for all 5 years of ARPA for this program. The second would be $50,000 toward planning either an annexation or a long-term lease of the Camp Murray boat launch property. This is starting to do planning. This isn't finalizing this, but it's taking the first steps towards figuring out how it could occur. And then two items that are considered kind of TBD in terms of amount, but once a new location is identified for the senior activity center for the city, it's presumed that there's going to be needed tenant improvements at that location, whatever it is. So identifying that as a use and as cost to be determined when a location is arrived at. And then the city at the end of last year was approached to see if we wanted to participate or support the establishment of a Dolly Parton Imagination Library. And the idea here is not that the city is taking the lead, but that the city supports the library system, the school district, and perhaps the Rotary Club or other social organizations that would be in lead position for those programs. In terms of external recommendations, there is a recommendation to fund the supportive services that are being provided at Aspen Court by Lehigh. We know that the total that's for the amount in 21 and 22 is about $144,000. And it is up to 181,797 for the 23 services based on the contract that you have included in attachment A. The contract obviously has not been signed by council, but that is what has been reviewed and is ready for signature should the council be ready to proceed. The second recommendation is to continue funding Tacoma Pro Bono's eviction prevention services, again, through the end of the ARPA period, or December 31st of 26. And attachment B of your materials tonight have information about that, but this is a $225,000 annual cost for the next 3 years. A third request is to support 1 year of the use of the Centerforce building in Springbrook for Springbrook Connections. This is something where they need 1 year's worth of funding from an external source, and then after that, they will be able to apply and receive funding from Pierce County as a family resource provider. So this would be the 1 year that this request would come from Springbrook Connections. So once again, it's about 1.78 million that is remaining. The internal projects as listed tonight are almost 375,000 known amounts. And then there's those 2 projects that are to be determined amounts. The recommended external projects total about 1.05 million. And so put those 2 together and you would have 1.4 million, and then you would have about another 350,000 to split between the Dolly Parton Library and I just lost it. Oh, sorry, the Senior Service Center tenant improvements. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Anderson.
Starting with last first, who's the fiscal agent for Springbrook Connections?
All I can say is that we receive the applications and correspondence from Jesse Black, who I believe is their president, but I can certainly follow up on the fiscal agency.
So is it anything other than an unincorporated association of neighbors?
I don't know if the city attorney or city clerk might know the answer to that.
We would have to follow up on that.
Comment regarding Tacoma Pro Bono. Tacoma Pro Bono is an outgrowth of what was it's got a different name now, because it was actually the Bar Association's free legal services where he volunteered and did something for nothing. They are extremely well funded right now. They have like 15 attorneys that are paid, that are funded mostly through ARPA funds. They may hit a wall, and I just don't see where the volume is necessary. It's kind of an empire building thing right now. With respect to Lehigh, do we have an operating budget from Lehigh?
It's included in, I'm sorry, it's included in attachment A of tonight's materials. So I'll see if I can jump to it really quickly.
I didn't get down that far, I guess. Looking at the list.
Yeah, 122 talks about scope of services, but it just says supportive services provided between November 2021 and December 23. So, for the last 2 years, supposedly it's.
If you look to page 127, it breaks it out by year.
Got it.
Okay.
Mostly staffing.
But do we have we seen their entire budget? What they
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Have we seen their entire budget and what they spend their money on?
I can give you further detail than what is provided here based on what they have provided in the past to the county for reimbursement and City of Tacoma for reimbursement. But I'll have to do that as a follow-up. I don't have it here tonight.
My concern isn't so much the allocation to provide for proportionate share of operating funds as it is seeing what they spend the money on and making sure that we're only paying our fair share. I've heard some criticism of their program from the social services community and want to make sure that we perform some due diligence before we fund them at any particular level. But
What I can say tonight, Mr. Anderson, Councilmember Anderson, is that all of these funds here that you see were specifically identified for the 12 beds for City of Lakewood referrals.
right, but what are their operational expenses? Is there a 20% admin cut for Lehigh's office in Seattle? Is it lights? Is it FTEs? Is it counselors? Is it outreach?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that, and what is the total budget?
Mhm.
And then we look at those things and say, well, yeah, that's a fair thing to pay, instead of just saying, hey, here's your bill.
Runs about 15,000 a bed. If you look at 182 grand divided by 12
Yeah,
beds,
and it-
right?
Maybe entirely reasonable. I just
Yeah.
want to look down another layer.
I can provide some follow-up to the council tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Boki and then Mr. Branstetter.
So Tiffany, a couple of questions. The Aspen Court was supposed to convert. So help me out with the history of this. And if is that still the plan? Because it's now considered a something shelter and it was supposed to convert to permanent supportive at the end of 2023. Is that, and so this would carry us to that?
Correct.
That's
What
a
if-
question. Sorry there. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2021, the purchase was made and the intent then and the intent now is to have the facility function as a emergency service shelter through the end of 2023. And then in 24, it would convert to permanent supportive housing. And the way the contract reads that the Lakewood City Council signed was that through the end of 23, because of the amount of funds that the city put in to support the purchase, there would be 12 beds reserved while it was an emergency shelter. As it stands right now, once it converts, Lakewood no longer will have the ability to refer people to that facility once it's permanent supportive housing. And so the amount of funds that we're talking about right now would be the total amount up to $326,000 for the supportive services only for the years, very end of 21 through the end of 23.
Okay, so we're actually going back in time with some of this is retrospective payment because we got those additional funds. We got a good portion of our funds back. Is that correct?
The way the purchase happened was Lakewood put in $1 million, but 700,000 of that was a bridge loan and was intended to come back. We did not receive it as a city back into our coffers until October 31st of 22. So for whatever reason, that's how long it took for that transaction to happen for Lehigh. But we have received 100% of the bridge loan back. And so the idea here is that the supportive services would be covered out of those $700,000, and there would still remain over $300,000, over $350,000 for other uses now that the city council can allocate these ARPA funds for.
Okay, so thank you for that. The Senior Activity Center and the Dolly Parton Imagination Number, both TBD. So what is your ETA on the TBDs?
I can't give you a good answer on either one. I think the location of the senior center is something that our Parks and Recreation Department is actively pursuing right now, but I don't know where they're at with it. And then the Imagination Library is something that I believe it's Rotary that took the lead. The city manager may have received more recent correspondence than I about it, but it's something where should they move forward enough to have it actually come to be, there would be presumably a request for the city of Lakewood to support it as well.
So Springbrook Connections is still in the Center Force building. Were they always in the Center Force building, or are they just working out of, what are they working out of now?
I believe they are working out of that building now. The funds that they have will get them actually through the end of February. And so the $50,000 would be the cover of the cost for the balance of 2023.
So the family resource provider, and when you say family resource provider, in my mind, that trips the family resource centers. Is that the same thing that the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department operates?
I took that language verbatim from the Springbrook Connections application, but I believe that's the case.
Okay, and the Lakewood one was closed a few years back for whatever reason, and I don't understand why, but is that correct by the health department?
I believe so. I don't
I'm
know the details right.
by the way, I am with the mayor. I'll just chime in. I am with the mayor on the, or excuse me, Councilmember Anderson on the Tacoma pro bono. I just think there's a lot of money flying around on that federally and at the state level. So I don't know that we need to continue on that. And I'm not sure about the Camp Murray thing. I find it interesting we put a dollar amount on that, although we, 10 years later, the National Guard hasn't given us word one on what they want to do or what they're willing to do, as far as I know, unless that's changed. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, I had a question about the city's support of the BIPOC incubator, a business accelerator, that we made a contribution. That program has run its course over a period of time, documenting pretty successful outcomes that, but we only funded it through we funded it for a limited period of time, not through 2026.
Correct.
Is Pierce County intending or looking to continue that project and that activity? And is it in need of some funding for another 2 years?
I am not aware of that, Councilmember Brandstetter. We at the city have not been approached with an additional request for any ARPA funding for that program. So that's
Okay.
the best answer I can
I'm
provide.
just saying that is a program that if there was a need for some investment to continue it for another 3 or 6 sessions, it would be something that is proven to be beneficial and links well to our segments of our business community that participated in that and benefited from it. That with respect to this, and I understand, I think that we're dealing with limited information on the Springbrook Connections request. And so, before I'd really have an opinion about that, I'd really need some more to include what level of certainty is there that if we contributed money for 2023, that the county is ready to, on an ongoing basis, support it going forward. Yeah. I'd kind of like to know that before we had an opinion about doing that. The item about the LPD body worn camera, associate city attorney and legal specialist, this was something that when we approved it, we said, if this body camera program is going to then be ongoing, these are positions that are going to need to become long-term, and that through the going on, and that they really ought to then become general fund costs going forward, not just through 25 and 26, but there's no going back from the body worn camera program to do it. So I'm really anticipating that that's something that in the 25-26 biennium, we're going to fund as out of the general fund, and I wouldn't necessarily want to move forward with ARPA dollars to do it because it's going to be there in 27, 28, and 29, 30, going forward to some extent. I do like seeing the Camp Murray annexation on the list of considering, but I'd really like to consider it perhaps for a bigger chunk of money if we can get to a point of where it's really going to happen. I'm the summary here is very limited to plan for an eventuality if it should come about doing that, and that is similar to the Senior Activity Center. One of those two actually gets to a point of in 9 months from now of there being something that's not going to actually happen. Then I'd be looking to put some dollars and maybe some more substantial dollars towards those. Yeah, I defer to the people who know more about the legal folks about the Tacoma pro bono ability to fund themselves without more money from us. But I will say that I am opposed to considering additional money for Lehigh to fund the supportive services at Aspen Court. The need to fund supportive services was something this council discussed significantly at length when we were deciding whether we were going to contribute $1 million and join Tacoma and Pierce County to do it. And we agreed to provide $1 million towards the purchase of the property, and that the 12 seats was sort of was designed and looked at by me and in our discussions is that was the carrot that we were going to get for coming up with $1 million. That and that those 12 seats would be operating as an emergency shelter as they are today. But I also noted that once Lehigh got the building, they tried to back out of that. They didn't want to operate those things as a shelter because they had a little bit different operating model that they wanted to do, and we had to renegotiate our agreement with them to do that. But as for the operational costs for supportive services in the original discussions, that the city of Tacoma specifically stepped up and said, if everybody helps buy it, we'll be there with our funding sources for the tax piece of revenue that they had to be able to go and do that. And that we never obligated ourselves to pay supportive services for those 12. They obligated to us to provide the 12 in exchange for our $1 million. At various points along this road, I have sort of looked at the Lehigh folks being in kind of they keep trying to bait and switch things and change past agreements to their advantage going forward. And I'm not supportive of doing that. I mean, they're obligated to provide those 12 seats to us, and it's actually not really beds, it's rooms, the way I understand it. You can squeeze more than 12 in if you want, but that it's going to go away in 10 months. It's going off, and the obligations of Lehigh and of the city of Tacoma, frankly, that the supportive costs would be covered. They shouldn't be coming back to us for them, and we shouldn't be volunteering to move forward with them, in my view. So if it came to voting on a contract for Lehigh, you know, I would vote opposed to awarding a contract if we get to a point of seriously considering that. So I think there isn't really anything on this list. I appreciate the work that went into giving us, these are the options that are out there. I'm aware that we have another 20 months to really decide on the last dollar. And I'd certainly like to see some more information about the Imagination Library. I got a side of knee how it goes, what it is. But it's in my mind, it's also a little bit intertwined with other library services that we want to get going on. But I appreciate that it's not the library district that's doing it, that it's the Rotary Club, who I have some confidence that they would put something that is together that is beneficial to the community. If that's what it needs. So I really like to see them fill out what's the dollar that's needed to establish that and provide a basis for sustainability.
Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Spears, for the presentations. Really good. I just had one comment on the senior center portion. I know that everything is TBD on that. Just when I would love more information on that and potentially looking at it being more than just a senior center, something that is more multi-purpose also, but with a focus possibly, but more of a family resource center, something like that. So I didn't know if we could keep that in the conversation as we're moving forward. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Just as a follow-up to a couple of Mr. Branstadter's comments, one with respect to Lehigh, actually, I think the first switch came from the city of Tacoma. They made the representation. And if the county put in 5 million and they would put in 5 million and fund the operations, it was very explicit. They're the first ones that backed out on that. But it is correct that we were initially not pay anything for operations. We put our one-time money in. The second comment I had was with respect to the business accelerator. There is an interest on Pierce County to continue the program on a more limited basis. It's a matter of how many sessions that you fund, which languages you do it in, those kind of things. There was never a request to Lakewood in the first place to participate in funding that. It was volunteered, and as a result, Lakewood got quite a disproportionate share of the participants. I agree with Mr. Branstadter. There are some documented results there, which is, it's good to see. So I would put it in the back of my mind that if that opportunity arises again, we may want to follow the same route on some additional consideration to make sure, especially our international business community, gets an opportunity to participate in that again. Thanks.
Any other comments? I just a couple. I really appreciate you bringing forward some options, Ms. Spears. Ms. Spears, the comments made by Council members Anderson and Branstadter on Lehigh echo with me. I'm not supportive of funding any additional external monies to Lehigh. We gave them $1 million for 12 beds. It's $83,000 a bed. It was under the assumption that we would have, shelter beds for Lakewood residents, and it ended up being for a very short duration. I think that they've been adequately paid for it. I don't think we need to give them any more operational money. I wouldn't support it. I'm not supportive of additional funds to Tacoma Pro Bono for the reasons that others indicated. They've got plenty of money, and without seeing specific impact to Lakewood residents, I wouldn't want to invest more money into that right now. I'm kind of okay with some of the other internal monies there. We can get some information to you in the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. That's a bit of a coalition with Rotary leading the charge. The school district and Pierce County, I think, involved to some extent, but we can get some numbers and some flesh on the bone for that. I don't think the investment will be huge. It depends on the number of zip codes that you want to support within your action area, and that determines the number of children of an age or lower that would receive a free book every periodic period of time to encourage early reading and early learning. And so more to follow on that, but Rotary is going to take a lead on that for sure. One thing I don't see on here that I thought we had talked about to some extent was, given the fact that this is really one-time monies, we should do what we can to invest in a long-term capital project or capital projects. And we did that with the investments we've made with LASA, Nourish Pierce County here for the project in Lakewood. And one of the things we've talked at some length about is the urban park and cobbling together enough funds to make that happen. And before, in my opinion, before we expend any more of the limited ARPA dollars, I'd like to see kind of a proposal on that and what it might cost, and see if portions of these monies could or should be put to that effort for the benefit of a lot of residents in Lakewood and not just a few. That would be my thought. Any other thoughts on that? Mr. Boki? We've got some agreement from consensus from Mr. Boki, Deputy Mayor Moss, myself, and the other side of the dais here. So I think we really want to see some pencil to the paper on the design and cost of acquisition of the urban park piece that we've talked about, which is part of our legacy plan, the downtown plan. And I don't want to personally see monies dwindled away from ARPA that could be otherwise used for the greater community's benefit. Okay, any other thoughts there? Anything else, Ms. Spear?
No, thank you. I just will provide follow-up to the council this week. Thank you.
Did I give adequate direction on that?
I believe so. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else, Mr. Caulfield?
Actually, still on this item, I just wanted to clarify it would seem that there's consensus to not move forward with the Lehigh Supportive Services at Aspen Court for the last 2 years. So we can take that off the list.
Correct.
Is that okay? And then likewise, Tacoma Pro Bono, remove that from the list as well.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Could I?
Go ahead, Ms. Spear.
I'm sorry. So just to be perfectly clear then, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but the supportive services that were provided in the years 21 and 22, the council does not want to be covering those costs at Lehigh?
Well, I get the understanding that we didn't commit to it up front. I thought the $1 million was for those services in addition to helping acquire the building, but I thought we were going to get some benefit for 12 beds beyond just the limited period that we've gotten the benefit.
Well, if I could, Mr. Mayor, where the city sits now with funding is $1 million was originally provided to Lehigh. 700,000 has come back. So the net to Lehigh at this point is $300,000. And so the funding for the supportive services would come out of some of that 700,000 that's been returned. So I just want to make 100% sure I'm understanding where the council wants to go.
Mr. Anderson.
I don't think that's entirely accurate. There was a state grant that gave Lehigh that much money and perhaps more. They then came back and didn't want to reimburse the county for the majority of the $5 million on and went to Commerce and had Commerce hold the money, trying to get it reallocated to them. So there's been some chicanery going on, and I'm very uncomfortable funding such actions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Anything else, Mr. Caulfield?
Yes, Mayor, just a few updates. On the legislative front, state legislature had their policy committee cut off last Friday. So the next cutoff is fiscal. on this Friday, the 24th. A number of our key priorities continue to move forward, particularly our request for capital funding in support of our partnership with the Nisqually Indian Tribe down at Fort Steilacoom Park to recognize their cultural and historical presence down there. Also with $500,000 for LASA for their affordable low-income housing development that they're moving forward on, as well as our budget proviso as it relates to our community partnership out at Western State Hospital. Also last week, we learned that Medical Lake dropped the same bill that we had dropped a number of years ago that would memorialize this program. And so we jumped on that. However, it didn't make the cutoff, but we have had some follow-up conversations with Medical Lake about supporting that in the future, including talking about it in the interim. We also asked that they support our language request that focuses on services as opposed to hard FTEs as the program is currently aligned, because they too are requesting funding similar to our program in support of Eastern State Hospital. So they have agreed to do that. So we do have some backup and support there. Also, on the public safety side, the key bill, House Bill 1363, did make the cut. However, it has been, I would just say, kind of watered down in that it doesn't, as it relates to pursuits, it doesn't focus on any criminal offense. It only focuses on 6 of them. One of the things that we're looking at is this something that can work, or is it going to create more uncertainty and challenges as our officers are out there on the field? At this point in time, we are supporting it, but also the bill is only for 2 years. It sunsets in June 30th, 2025. So again, that's something that we'll continue to follow. On the housing side, there's a number of bills, and I know AWC is supporting some of them, but quite frankly, the bills that were, I would say most of the bills we're not supporting. And the reason being is they preempt your authority as the elected body and the elected representatives of the city of Lakewood. They also, in my opinion, violate home rule. And I also believe they're not consistent in some aspects with the Growth Management Act. But here's the real kicker. The real kicker is that a lot of these bills include provisions that we're already doing in our community, and many cities are doing in their community, but under their standards and under their rules and what their community wants. And I know you've heard me say this before, all 281 cities and towns in Washington state are the same, but at the same time, we're all very, very different as it relates to who and what we are. And we would ask the state legislature to let us be and let us figure that out ourselves, because we've been doing a pretty good job at it. Again, we'll continue to monitor and follow that. Also, Bill Adamson and Maria Tobin on SSMCP are doing a fantastic job, particularly as it relates to some changes in the DCCA program, as well as the occupational licensing bills. So some good work doing there. Back here at home, I just wanted to reiterate that, a key initiative of the City Council is to develop a DEI strategy. You appropriated monies in the current biennium to be able to do that. And I know I'd reported this out to you previously, but I wanted to let you know that we'll be bringing forward a contract and scope of services to undertake that work and review that with you as part of your March 6th City Council meeting under reports by the city manager. And if you're so inclined, our recommendation would be then to move forward with this company, HenderWorks. They're a consulting firm based out of Federal Way. They come highly recommended. We've had several conversations with the principal about the work, and they do have a connection to Lakewood as well. So the next steps after that would be, if council's so inclined to consider that contract to be able to move forward. And even though the council has appropriated $100,000 over 2 years to do it, the scope that we've been able to negotiate totals $90,000. And it would be about a 12 to 18 month process to undertake this process. And again, it would be focused internally, which has been City Council's direction in this area. You just had a conversation about the Senior Activity Center, and I think as I had previously reported, we're looking, we were hoping that Pierce County was going to reopen the Lakewood Community Center on Lakewood Drive, but again, that building is in a bit of disrepair. It requires about $20 million worth of improvements just to reopen it, or particularly the side of the building that we were using. As a matter of fact, where our Senior Activity Center, they could actually be demolishing. That part of the building could go away. So long story short, they're 4 or 5 years out before that building even becomes available again for us to lease. Likewise, we've been talking with the Pierce County Library System about, jointly working with them about incorporating a senior community center as part of a future downtown library. I'll get to that in a second, but again, that's 4 or 5 years out as well. So because of that, we're now at a point where we need to find a home for our seniors. And so we have secured the services of a local broker, Tim Johnson, and he's helping us identify some locations, and would like to be centrally located in the downtown area along a bus line, things along those lines. We're looking for about 5,000 square feet to be able to, provide the programs that our seniors really do deserve. So more to come on that. And speaking of the library, as you know, we continue to work with them regarding the Tensler log, and the city is willing to take that piece of property, secure it, and then make it available for public display later on this year, working with your Arts Commission. So that is moving forward. The caveat is that they being the Pierce County Library System Board of Trustees, needs to make a decision on what they're going to do with that main library. Are they going to renovate it and, rebuild that as the main Lakewood Library? But again, given some of the reports that they commissioned, they've got an uphill battle there. Or secondly, are they going to decide to remove the building and look for an alternative site? We're waiting on that. If they decide to remove the building, demolish the building, and look at alternative sites, the city, we certainly have some ideas. We think it should be somewhere in the downtown. We think it could be part of an urban park. A lot of good ideas there. So that's what we're waiting on. They're hoping to be, the Board of Trustees is hoping to make a decision on that at their next board meeting in March, sometime in March, first or second week of March. Meanwhile, they are moving forward with an interim library. They went out to bid. They got some bids back. And so they're working through that right now. They're hoping to be able to award a contract to move forward on constructing an interim library at the corner of Gravelly Lake Drive and Alfreda as part of their March board meeting. So that's the latest update that we have there. And the size of the interim library would be a little over 10,000 square feet. So that's where we kind of are. Back to the downtown, one of your key federal priorities for 2023 was to pursue some federal funding, the RAISE grant, which had previously been called the Tiger, the Build program. And as part of that larger congressional infrastructure package that was passed by Congress about 1.5 years ago. Initially, we thought we could pursue some construction dollars, but after looking at the NOFA, we realized, we got to have a better plan. We got to have having a conceptual plan is not going to work. We actually need something that is at more of a higher level design. And as I previously reported, what we are going to be pursuing is an $850,000 RAISE grant for planning purposes. The deadline had been moved up and to this week or next week. And so actually we're in the process of hitting the send button for that grant. We've been in communication with our federal delegation. All members of our federal delegation have written a letter of support. Likewise, we have received 13 letters of support from our many community partners here in Lakewood, which bodes well for the process as well. That'll be a key item that we'll have as a discussion point with our federal legislators when we go back to DC in the latter part of March. And typically, they'll announce the award winners in the September-October timeframe on that. Western State Hospital. So the city learned that one state agency kind of stuck it to another state agency. And what I mean by that is that the State Department of Health is now mandating that the State Department of DSHS, which oversees Western State Hospital, has to connect to the Lakewood Water District. As it relates to the future development and redevelopment down there, they are prohibited from utilizing their existing internal water system. We don't have any information about why DOH did that. We actually learned that from the water district. It's our understanding that the Lakewood Water District, if you recall, we built a water main along Angle Lane a number of years ago for Fort Steilacoom Park and future buildings in like the H barn and such. And that water line was actually upgraded at the request of Lakewood Water District to provide for water at Western State Hospital. So hopefully, everything will work out. But at this point in time, because of that, the city's going to have to amend our SEPR documents as it relates to Western State Hospital. So it does slow down some of the work that they are doing there because they don't have a water certificate of water availability because they've been required to change water purveyors. So they can move forward with some demolition and some things like that, but a lot of the major development that they had been moving forward on kind of comes to a halt. And again, they're going to have to work it out between those two state agencies. You might have seen an article in the TNT recently about racial restrictive covenants, and it's a project that was initiated by the state legislature back in 2021, and it's being undertaken by the University of Washington and Eastern Washington. And the purpose is to identify all of these covenants that exist that essentially, prohibit primarily people of color living in certain neighborhoods or even on residential properties. It exists all over the state in all cities and all counties. I know in a previous life, we encountered it, the whole downtown area had a covenant. And we had to work with the property owners to have that restriction lifted. On one hand, the covenants are illegal. The Supreme Court actually ruled on it in 1948 to that effect. But then again, in 1964 with the Federal Fair Housing Act, it was, it's not allowed. That level of discrimination is not allowed. The challenge is it still exists out there. And so what I'd like to recommend to this body is that you consider a resolution and I think there's over 900 of them here in Lakewood that have this covenants. And what I'd like to recommend is that, you consider a resolution to support the actions of, that are identified in that House Bill 1335, which is for the city just to make people aware, hey, here's how you go about having those covenants removed from your property and from your subdivision and things like that. So I would just put that out there. And certainly if you want some more information on that, we can provide that to you. Back to SSMCP. This is a tremendous update. The Nisqually Tribal Council voted to increase their level of membership, which means participation in SSMCP by moving from the steering committee level to the executive leadership team level. The executive leadership team level, it's a minimum of $50,000 a year is what the annual payment is. And that's where Lakewood, Lacey, and Pierce County are. So it's a pleasure to have them at that level, driving major policy issues as it relates to SSMCP, particularly as it relates to the transportation issues along the I-5 Delta and what it's doing to the Nisqually River. So good work there by Bill Adamson on getting that done. And then lastly, just as it relates to your calendar, this Thursday, the Boys and Girls Club is going to be having their annual Legacy of Hope event at the Hotel Murano in downtown Tacoma. And I know I sent you a link. And then on a week from Friday, on March 3rd, is the first annual Dr. Claudia Thomas Community Service Award Gala event at the McGavick Center. And I know Deputy Mayor Moss is leading that effort as the chair of LMCC. And so just wanted to bring that up as well. But with that, Mayor and Council, that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Caulfield. Very thorough. Any questions? Mr. Brandstatter.
Thank you, Mr. Caulfield. With regards to the Department of Health issuing their mandate, to DSHS. Did they provide a timeline of a by when date?
Councilmember Branstetter, they did not. They just said whatever new development occurs down there needs to be connected to the Lakewood Water District.
So the actions that are slowed or that the city would have to take because of that change, maybe sometime in the future.
I don't understand.
I mean, the SEPA, for instance, is valid until DSHS actually does that with the water district.
Yeah, the SEPA, we just need to update the SEPA to show that the water purveyor is now going to be Lakewood Water District, and then to verify with Lakewood Water District, do they have the infrastructure to be able to accommodate that? So that part is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
But then the real issue is that DSHS is going to have to go back to all of their contractors and their architects and everything and look at, okay, how do we now connect to Lakewood Water District? Because right now their proposals are all connected to their internal water system.
Mhm.
So that's going to be, so it's on them. It doesn't, the city, we're the regulator. We're simply issuing permits. So it's on them to kind of work that out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again. Council comments. Let's start with Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. QCRC had their annual meeting, General Assembly on Thursday night, and we approved had the annual report and then approved the schedule for the year. So, it's just a lot of updates and presentations. So in March, for instance, there's going to be a presentation. I don't know who's going to do it on the 0.1% sales tax for affordable housing, which I think the county council may be taking up here fairly soon. So that was done. So and then the work program. So for 2023, and it's just kind of, I don't know that there's anything that really jumps out at me. The TCC ad hoc committee that I'm on, talking about the criteria. We meet tomorrow, actually, I think at about 1 o'clock, and I forwarded that to the city manager and to Mr. Busich. I appreciate Mr. Busich being on the calls because he's actually going to be the one to kind of help me through on what kind of changes we're looking for. I'm beginning to think that there actually might be an overall consensus that some of the criteria need to be changed. Originally, I thought there would be some resistance to that, but right now I'm actually more positive tonight, but maybe by tomorrow I won't be. But I think there's some, I wouldn't call it a groundswell, but there is some support now for that some things are going to have to change. So I'll let you know. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Bell. Councilmember Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do intend to go to the community meeting that the library executive director and our county council member are going to hold tomorrow, to just sort of see if the level of interest in the community is staying elevated and what is going on. I do have a concern that regardless of how the Board of Trustees decide, if they decide to demolish the current building and build on site, or they decide to demolish it and then move to another site, that they don't link the demolition of the building to passing a bond issue for the future construction of one or more sites, so we don't end up with a mini QFC situation that runs for years there to do that. And if they decide that they're going to renovate the existing building, well, you know, that's, I guess that's within their purview to do that. You know, I think that our role here really is that we need to try to look that the library system and board of trustees look at what's best for the community and not just at what do they have to do to resolve the current situation, but taking it, but to look at it as an opportunity as to how to really create a system of library services and a location for library services that will benefit not only Lakewood, but will benefit the entire system, depending upon if you put some things here, you know, then like our library was a place where there was a legal library and there were some other things, and that's lost to the entire system now to be able to go into it. So it's a situation that we need to watch closely, and at some point in time, when they come up with a definitive plan, I think the community is going to expect us to evaluate that plan and see if it's really what's best for the community, or should we take some initiative to move in a different direction. I hope they come up with a good plan to be able to go forward in doing it. On the other side, I would say that the satellite things that they are doing at the various places where they're providing computer things or access to books or people to be able to go and do that, the people that are using those, that my feedback to them is that they're glad that they're there and they're using them repetitively once they found where they are and found them valuable.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. There's almost 3 hours left in Mardi Gras. Let the good times roll.
Very good. Is it Fat Tuesday yet? I don't know. I didn't have my chocolate tonight. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Had it for you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In honor of Black History Month, today I was honored at Cole Park Technical College as a diversity, and they were really interested in my story that they had seen on Channel 5. So it was good. There was a lot of people that showed up, a lot of the students I got to meet. When I retired from Harperstone Credit Union, so as a gift.
There you go.
The gift that they gave me was a $3,000 scholarship to students 3 times a year. And I got to meet the student today that received them.
Wow.
So that was really special. I appreciated that. It was a great event. They gave me lunch too. That made it. That was, I thought about you. And for the March 3rd, thank you guys so much for supporting that event. I am happy to say we exceeded our goal. We had a goal of 150 and we had 160.
Great.
So thank you guys very much. And I hope you're going to come and enjoy, because it's going to be great. And so and that is my baby, and I'm really passionate about that. So thank you. That's all I have.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, good work on getting a full registration for the gala event. My arm is still sore from being twisted, but we're going to enjoy it nonetheless. So really, it should be a great event.
Oh, we'll dance.
Yeah, we will. I know we will. It'll be great. And congratulations on your recognition again. It's a fabulous story, and your story is a tribute to many, and it's a wonderful story to honor. So thank you for your service.
I was just pleased that they were interested in hearing, and they had some great questions But I warned them to make them easy questions because I was kind of nervous to tell the story, but it was fun. It was fun.
Just a couple of things, reminders that we're busy next week. We've got our council meeting on Monday, which is at 7 still, but we do have 2 other council meetings that week on Tuesday, the 28th, and Wednesday, March 1st, both at 6 p.m., not 7. So just a reminder on that. Those are the 2 evenings that we're going to be interviewing the council candidates from the applications. And we will have packets before us for that process, and there will be some food prior to that meeting, so that I know most people are coming from work to get here on time. So 6 o'clock, if you can get here a little earlier, that would be even better. In terms of library discussion, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. You know, I would love to see kind of what's going on the 2 main asphalt jungles that we have that are subject to development. The first being behind the Barnes Noble. Those RFPs have come in. You know, we don't know what's been selected. We may not know for a period of time. If Mr. Caulfield or Ms. Newton know, they'll probably let us know as soon as they can. But that'll be helpful because that may impact what may happen with the Barnes Noble building and where that business may go. Perhaps, who knows if that's a position or an opportunity for the library district, as well as whatever may happen to the QFC. I have heard anecdotally that there have been numerous inquiries or perhaps even offers made to the existing owners. So I'm sure when information is made public, we'll be in the know on that as Mr. Caulfield becomes aware of what changes are awry or afoot. So without further ado, the council will now recess into executive session for approximately 15 minutes pursuant to RCW 4231.10(1)(I) to discuss with legal counsel representing the city, litigation or potential litigation. Council is not expected to take any action following the executive session other than to adjourn this meeting. So at this time, we will recess into executive session. Thank you.